The Edge of Wonder presents Contact in the Desert 2018. Special guests featuring Dr. Robert Schoch.
Hey guys, I have an awesome guest here today, Dr. Robert Schoch. It's great to see you and have you here with us.
Thank you. I very much appreciate being here and being interviewed.
It's great. So tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the work that you've done.
I am a full-time faculty member at Boston University, but what you're referring to is my work on ancient civilizations, and this is something I've been pursuing for almost 30 years now. I first got involved in ancient civilizations in a professional way, should we say, in about late 1980s, early 1990s. First trip to Egypt was really pivotal in 1990, and ever since I've been applying my expertise. I have a Ph.D. from Yale in Geology and Geophysics. I've been applying that geological and geophysical expertise to the study of ancient civilizations. And what I'm best known for, I think, to this day, is for what's called the redating of the Great Sphinx. We were talking just before the interview, and I think you said you'd even seen it, The Mystery of the Sphinx.
Yeah, that's a very famous documentary.
Very famous documentary that we're in 2018 now. I can't believe how the time goes by. That documentary came out in 1993, first aired on NBC. What I've put together now is that it's not just the Great Sphinx, and initially I realized as a geologist that the Great Sphinx cannot be from the time period that's claimed to be traditionally. It can't be 2500 BC because it sits on the edge of the Sahara Desert. Yet, when I first went to study the Sphinx, I realized as a geologist that it shows precipitation, rainfall, weathering on the body, on the walls of the Sphinx enclosure, very definitive. Had to go back to a different climatic regime, so that was the first clue, if you would. We did seismic studies. I did that with Thomas DeBecke. I want to mention my late colleague, John Anthony West. What I put together now is that we're finding evidence of this earlier cycle of civilization at many different localities. The Great Sphinx, Turkey is very important, sites in Asia even, that go back to this remote period. And what is this remote period? It's the end of the last ice age. In 9700 BC, based on, I'm a geologist, so sedimentation, stratigraphy, ice cores, sediment cores, lunar data even, because the moon is subjected to the same things as the Earth. We were hit not by a comet or meteorite, but by a solar outburst, a coronal mass ejections. Basically, the sun, acting as any star does, it sometimes spits out, what's known as plasma, electrically charged particles. They hit the atmosphere. Some of it, when it's that powerful as it was 12,000 years ago, drives down to the Earth. You devastate it. This early cycle of civilization due to these solar outbursts, these coronal mass ejections, and it drove this early sophisticated civilization to its knees, as they say, drove it back to a more primitive state, and you had essentially a dark period for thousands of years until civilization re-emerged in 4000, 3000, that period BC. So that is what we see in dynastic Egypt. The Sphinx that you see today has been reworked. It was reappropriated by dynastic Egyptians. It was recarved. The head is recarved. But we have a core body, and the origins go back much, much earlier. The dynastic Egyptians reused older structures like the Sphinx. They reused the legacy, and they themselves talk about this earlier civilization.
Do you know about any of the religious or spiritual aspects of the Sphinx?
We don't know specifically what the Sphinx was used for, what it was purposed for initially. Well, actually we do. I'll come to that. And it's not religious and spiritual, but it ties in with that. Now, later in dynastic times, when it was restored, it was refurbished, they were reusing this older structure, there was a cult around the Sphinx. It was venerated. They dug the statue out of the sand. They recarved the face. It became a center of cult veneration. And think of it this way. This is the way I think of it. They acknowledged it as a very ancient structure that held high esteem. They held it in very high esteem. It was an artifact from this earlier cycle of civilization. Now, when we go back to that earlier cycle and we go back to very early dynastic times, we, as it happens to be, when I say we, and I gotta give credit where credit is due, Dr. Manu Safzadeh, a good colleague and friend of mine, he discovered recently, and this is within the last couple of years, he discovered a series of inscriptions or titles in the hieroglyphs that go back to very early dynastic times, even before the time when the Sphinx was supposedly carved in 2500 BC by the classical Egyptologists. And some of these go back at least 500 years earlier, the hieroglyphic inscriptions, and they talk, we're convinced, we've reinterpreted these, that they talk about the Sphinx as a lioness, a female lion. So I told you the head's been recarved. We now are convinced that the original head was that of a lion, but not a male lion, a female lion. And this was Methit, the lioness, the goddess Methit, who was a guardian. And what was she guarding? We have hieroglyphic inscriptions that show Methit with what is a key coming out of her back. It looks like a bent rod, but it's actually a primitive, we would say primitive key, because keys and locks were different than they are now. So the key is coming out of her back, and she is guarding an archive. She is guarding a sacred, I'll call it sacred, important archive. And the people that held the title were the ones who held the key to the archive of Methit. And so she has an archive. Now, it gets even better, in my opinion, because back in the early 1990s, when Dr. Thomas DeBecke and I were doing seismic work around the Sphinx, because I wanted to look at subsurface weathering rates and mineralogical changes, we just happened to stumble upon seismically a chamber under the left paw of the Sphinx. And I believe now that that is the archive under Methit, which has since become the Sphinx, that she, the goddess Methit, is guarding.
Wow, that is...
The chamber is still there. To my knowledge, it hasn't been explored yet. It hasn't been opened up. This is something I want to do. If there are people out there, no, I'm being absolutely serious now. If there are patrons out there that have, I don't want to sound crude, but have money that they would like to fund, and we're talking substantial money. We're not talking $100,000. We're talking order of magnitude more. It's going to be in low millions at least. But this is serious stuff, because this could really open up so many things. If we find records, which I think there are records in it, because even the seismic, the ringing, there's something in it. It's not empty chamber, we believe. But to actually explore it and find ancient records from this much earlier period would be fabulous. I mean, this could be the equivalent in its own way, maybe more outstanding than Tutankhamun's tomb when that was found in the 1920s.
I mean, that could change so much if you guys actually found that. I mean, that would change everything we know about Egypt.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of possibilities here.
Why don't we hear too much about the early civilization with the Egyptians?
Well, because there's very little evidence for it, but we're now developing it. No one ever looked for it before, because when I was in college and graduate school, if you went past about 5,000-6,000 years ago, you knew there was no civilization to look for. You stopped looking for it. And if the Egyptians talked about what they called Septepe, a time when the gods and the humans were together, more or less the advanced people, advanced civilization, but that was just dismissed as myth, total myth. Plato talked about it, Atlantis, and his dating is precisely the end of the last ice age when you turned into our modern chronology, 96, 9700 BC. So we have this cycle of civilization is destroyed effectively or brought to its knees by these cataclysms at the end of the last ice age caused by the sun. And I have a name for it, solar-induced dark age, which is sort of ironic, SIDA, we call it, solar-induced dark age, SIDA, that ironically the sun would cause a dark age to occur. So I'm coming from a very scholarly academic point of view. I'm a physical scientist. I only look at hard evidence, and that's what I base my views on. But you have to look at all the evidence. You don't dismiss evidence just because it's anomalous and doesn't fit your theory.
I heard that there's a word called problematica. Anything that doesn't fit, it's like, well, just put it in this bucket and
another bucket and ignore it. And people do that, seriously. And sometimes they do it consciously, sometimes I think they do it unconsciously. And I see this in some of my fellow scholars, and I'm not trying to criticize them, but you have to be aware of your own biases.
Okay, just last question. What motivates you to keep doing what you're doing?
I'm interested in ancient cultures and civilizations, but I don't think that's a good enough reason necessarily for me to keep going. I think it's genuinely important. I think we have genuine things to learn from these ancient civilizations, from the ancient earlier cycle of civilization. So I think we need to learn from the past. It almost sounds trite, and maybe it is, but people don't take it I think as seriously as they should. We really need to learn from these ancient civilizations as we prepare for the future. We are more vulnerable now, say, to a solar outburst than any of those, in my opinion, ancient civilizations were. Why? Look at what we're doing. You're holding a microphone up to me to talk into. We are electronically based, we're computer based, we have all these sophisticated electrical grid systems, electronics, satellites, GPS, etc. Okay, that's wonderful when they're working. You have even a minor solar outburst, it's going to cause devastation around the world. How are people going to survive in modern technological society without electricity for months or years? I'm not trying to scare anyone, but I think we need to take these things seriously, and so there are lessons from the past. So that's one aspect to it. The other thing that I think about, and I think now back to my late colleague, John Anthony West, who got me started in all this, and again, I want to pay my respects to, and that's one reason I'm at this particular conference to pay, I did a tribute to him. He liked to point out that we may be very sophisticated technologically. That doesn't mean we're sophisticated spiritually or philosophically or however you want to put it. That in some cases, one could almost argue as the technology goes up, spirituality goes down. It's like a balance, and it's very hard to have both simultaneously. I mean, people get distracted by all the social media and the games and the toys. When I say toys, all the technology, and my students before class, I try to stop them once class starts, and they're all just on their iPhones or smartphones or whatever, and they're not interacting with each other. And I mean, I think, we need to learn to balance things. Technology is great in its place, what John Anthony West would argue, and I think there was quite a bit of truth to it. We have lost something, perhaps, from a spiritual consciousness point of view that some of these ancient civilizations had. But ultimately, their civilization was based on these, what we would call high spiritual principles, not just making more money for this person at the expense of that person, etc. So, and I'm an anthropologist in part. I mean, when I say that, I was trained as an undergraduate. I have a degree in anthropology, and I think it's very important to look at how different peoples, different societies approach the world, approach life.
thank you for joining us for another edition of The Edge of Wonder. Be sure to hit like and subscribe, and click that notification bell so you don't miss a single episode from The Edge of Wonder. Wonder, wonder.